So these are just from Gartner, really looking at what they're seeing from a cloud adoption perspective, and particularly on the multi-cloud, hybrid cloud strategies. So by 2021, over 75% of mid-size and large organizations will have adopted a multi-cloud and or hybrid IT strategy. By 2022, public cloud services will be essential for 90% of the business innovation. So how many of you are utilizing cloud today in some form? Yeah, so most of you, cool. Is there anyone who's not but thinking about it? And is there anyone utilizing Zerto in that cloud architecture anywhere right now? So a few, cool. All right. So obviously our message very much around being a single platform. You know, Zerto's not a modular platform where you have to install lots of different elements, buy different products. You buy Zerto and you get all of the capability. So this is our vision: single platform for continuous availability, data protection and workload mobility to, from and between multiple clouds and obviously platforms. So we're really going to go into, I guess, on what we support today, what our capabilities are. I'll touch on some things that we're doing in the future as well, but I'm going to try and not steal too much of Rob's thunder for later on in the conference. So those of you who already have Zerto, continuous data protection, you'll know is the core to everything we do. So all of these different use cases that I just mentioned, they all are ultimately reliant on the continuous data protection capability we have underneath. This really delivers our journaling capability, our application consistency capability, as well as obviously now long-term retention, which is obviously relatively new into the product with the 7.0 launch. We then obviously wrap the orchestration and automation. So this is really key for the mobility piece, but also fast recoveries and things like that you would associate with the traditional disaster recovery use case. And then lastly, we have our analytics and control. I'll talk a bit around what we're doing on there, and there's a session on that later on in the week as well. So quick one on architecture. I know there's obviously quite a few customers in here, so some of this will be familiar to you. Obviously, hypervisor deployments, we have a slightly different deployment to how we deploy it in public cloud environments because of the nature of it. Hypervisor deployments of VMware Hyper-V, we obviously have hypervisor access, so we deploy virtual replication appliances per hypervisor server, and that's obviously how we scale. When we're operating in Azure, AWS, we can't obviously have hypervisor access there. We're reliant on the capabilities of that platform and utilizing those and integrating natively with those to deliver the outcome. So we have Zerto cloud appliances in those deployments. So it's available as an AMI on AWS, it's available in the Azure Marketplace on Azure. And in essence, this is a ZVM and a VRA wrapped up into one. It's not quite as simple as that, and we'll touch on some of the changes we're making there. But that's in essence what's happening. The key thing when you're replicating into the cloud, one of these cloud environments or any environment with Zerto, is that compute isn't being utilized. So we're obviously replicating into storage. So AWS, that's S3 buckets. In Azure, that's into blob storage. What that means is you're not paying for any compute costs until you perform a recovery or a move or anything like that. So it's much more cost effective from a compute perspective. There's nothing that needs to be up and running in there. There's some agent-based solutions where you have to pre-build VMs and then you replicate into those and keep them updated and stuff like that. That's not how Zerto works. The key thing is as well, we still all have our traditional capabilities. So if we look at an application today, these maybe back in the day would have been made up of single VMs, or maybe there was more of them where they were made up of single VMs. These days your applications are going to be made up of multiple different services running across multiple VMs. And traditionally, when you protect these, you're protecting them all individually. Obviously, that means that when you come to recover, you're recovering every different element to a different point in time. You've then probably got to fight to get them all back into sync to get it working again, and that whole process can take longer than actually the recovery itself. The difference that Zerto provides is obviously our virtual protection capability. This really delivers the consistency across all of these. And this is the same going into obviously any of our cloud environments. We deliver exactly the same capabilities. You configure virtual protection groups to protect them. Now the key thing with this is it doesn't matter what storage they're on, which host they're running on, you've got that flexibility to deliver that consistent protection across them all. So when we're creating checkpoints, we're creating them at the exact same point in time across all VMs that you group in a virtual protection group. So when you recover to an in-synchronized point in time, a consistent point in time across all of those VMs, so you don't have that issue with fighting to recover all of the different elements. So typically, the way most of our customers will deploy this, and obviously there's different scenarios, but for the most part it's a VPG per application, because then that gives you that flexibility. We then obviously have the journaling capability, so I obviously mentioned that we insert in checkpoints every 5 seconds. This is exactly the same with our cloud environments. We're still doing that, we're still providing you that journal. So this journal exists in S3 bucket in AWS, it exists in blob storage in Azure, and it gives you that ability to recover to that level of granularity still into those environments. Or if you're performing moves, this can be relevant for performing test failovers or test moves before you actually move your environment. You can obviously utilize the journal where we still provide ongoing protection, but you've actually performed the entire move, everything's come up in Azure or AWS, you've validated, all my processes, all the orchestration we're providing, is that all working correctly? You can then obviously stop the test, and you essentially have performed the move already. It's taken you only a few minutes, but it's giving you confidence that when you do the live move, you know exactly what's going to happen, you know it's going to work, because you've essentially already done it, but there's been no impact on production whilst you're doing that. So the key thing with this is obviously it gives you the ability to recover various different elements. A lot of our customers, especially the customers who've been with us a long time, are not always aware of our journal file level recovery capability. So this is built in, again available in the likes of Azure and our public cloud environments, but you can actually utilize our journal to pull individual files out of your VMs, utilizing any of these checkpoints as well. So rather than going back to a traditional backup tool that maybe backed up last night, maybe your user's file's been corrupted or they accidentally deleted it, you can recover it to seconds before that happened, rather than last night's copy and lose all the productivity associated with that. So this is very powerful. Obviously, long-term retention, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this is now obviously an extension of that journal. It allows you to take points in time from the journal, store them for long-term retention, and essentially look to replace the traditional backup use case. Key thing with this is when we're doing it, it's all done on the target side, so production overheads are a thing of the past with backups. So those of you who came to the session before this would have heard a bit about that. Now, orchestration is obviously something that's key to all of the different use cases we have, even backup, because when you're recovering, you don't want to have to go in and manually recover things, or manually change IP addresses, change which networks things are connected to. You want all of that to be done for you, because it means that you're going to recover quicker, or if you're doing a move, it means you're going to move quicker, and ultimately it's about minimizing impact on business. We actually have deep integration with regards to our orchestration. So for example, you can see here we've got our options that you have to configure when you're creating the virtual protection group for Azure, and you can see the options as well we have for AWS. So we give you the ability to choose which VNets you're connecting into, which subnets you want the VMs connected onto, which network security groups or security groups in AWS, and which instance sizes as well you want the VMs to be recovered into. So you can set that as a default across your entire VPG, but you can also go in and edit that on a per VM basis. When you edit on a per VM basis, you can even set the private IP that your VM is going to be assigned when it's recovered into these platforms. So there's a great deal of orchestration there, so that ultimately when you run one of these processes with us, or perform a recovery, a move, whatever it might be, at the end of that, your VM is going to be up and available and ready to use, rather than you having to go in and having a long list of things to change and set up again. And it doesn't matter where you install it. So yes, we have a ZCA instead of a ZVM and VRAs when it's in public cloud. Interface looks exactly the same. So you're still creating virtual protection groups, as I said. Everything's in the same place. It's not a different product. It's the same product, just packaged in a slightly different way. And this is all about ease of use and simplicity, which really is one of our core values. So AWS is supported today. That's to and from AWS. No performance impact, no agents, and as I said, one experience, one platform. It's the same with Azure. No agents, no performance impact, one experience. The key thing here is we are integrating natively with these platforms. And that's why we don't need agents and things like that, because we're actually performing that integration in there. I'll talk a bit more around some of the stuff we've done in Azure in a bit, actually, with Zerto 7. But obviously, I've talked about public cloud. There are many other cloud platforms. We have a lot of cloud service providers. So we've actually got the Gartner Magic Quadrant for DR as a service up here. 10 providers on there. 9 of those providers are utilizing Zerto in some way to deliver some of that capability. We've got the Forrester Wave, 10 providers on here, again for DR as a service. All 10 of those are utilizing Zerto to deliver some of their capabilities. So the key thing here is we've got a vast array of cloud service providers who also can help you with that cloud journey. And Zerto is regularly utilized to onboard you into these platforms. I guess the key thing is there's a lot of different platforms that are available when you're looking at cloud, and it's about finding the right one that fits for you. And it might not be, this session's obviously focused on multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. It might not be that there's one that fits all. The key thing is with Zerto is that we're going to support you across this wide array of different platforms. So it doesn't matter which ones you choose, we provide you that mobility. If we look at what you can do then is you can actually start replicating between these cloud platforms and providing that protection. And this could be for DR purposes, it could be for mobility purposes, whatever your use cases are. And that's really the key aspect. So obviously AWS and Azure support, we've had that for a fair amount of time. But I like this quote from Thomas Edison, there's a way to do it better, find it. Very much the way we like to operate. And in Zerto 7, we've introduced some additional scale-out capabilities. So I mentioned that we don't have the ability to deploy VRAs across the hypervisors underneath the cloud platform. So what we are trying to do is obviously offload some of the workloads on the ZCA to use some of the native scale-out capabilities of these platforms. So in Zerto 7, which was released back in April, we've actually introduced this for promotion capabilities. So this is for recoveries. What that means is you're going to see faster recoveries. And essentially, what we're doing here is we have the journal, as I said, in blob storage in Azure. What we're doing when you perform a recovery is the ZCA is creating an Azure queue, which essentially is containing the various changes that exist in the journal that need to be promoted to the replica disk based on the point in time that you've chosen within the journal. So we create that queue, so we're using Azure queues at that point, and we're then creating an Azure VM scale set. And what this scale set does is actually handle that promotion of the data from the journal to the cloned page blob. So the cloned page blob is essentially the oldest point in time in the journal, and then we just need to update all of the changes that have occurred from the point in time you've chosen to this cloned page blob, and that obviously then the recovery is complete. Now previously this was all done by the ZCA, and that's why scaling the ZCA was a case of deploying multiple ZCAs. What we're delivering here is actually the capability to scale this in line. So when you perform a recovery process, we create all of this, we spin up a load of worker nodes within the Azure scale set, and they are ultimately reading from the queue and updating the cloned page blob, which then is attached to a VM instance within Azure. So this should mean that anyone who's utilizing Azure as a target is going to see a much faster RTO there. And again, the key aspect here is the native integration that we're providing. We obviously have our analytics platform. So this is an opt-in service. It's going to provide you a lot of information. Some customers maybe aren't utilizing this today. There's no extra cost for it. It gives you a lot of visibility. It's something that's continuously updated. And we're actually, within here, bringing out a new element to this, which is going to help on sizing your environments, either as a new customer, or if you've got a new requirement, a new site, you can utilize this to get a really good handle on where you are today with the workloads that you're looking to move or protect with Zerto, and what you're going to need from a network perspective, storage perspective. With Azure, we're even going to make recommendations around the ZCA for you with step 1. But if you want to hear more about some of the analytics stuff, my colleague Lee at the back is actually running a session tomorrow at the end of the day, I believe. So he's going to go into this in a lot more detail. And as I said, this can be something that's very valuable to new customers and existing customers, as I said. REST API, so we have an API behind all of this, something we're continually extending as well. I'm running a session with my colleague Heisber tomorrow at lunchtime, so again, feel free to join us if you want to hear a bit more about the API. But the key thing here is this gives you another level of integration where you can integrate it with your own monitoring solutions, orchestration solutions, that provide capabilities beyond just the scope of disaster recovery and mobility. And so if we look at the full picture, what can we actually deliver here? You could have a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud strategy. And this is something that obviously a lot of you probably are thinking about adopting or are adopting. As I said, there's not one cloud for all. But what you can deliver with this is the mobility piece around that, the protection piece, and ultimately IT resilience. So a lot of people we've spoken to who aren't customers, they're adopting these hybrid cloud, multi-cloud strategies, but they're placing their workloads based on day one requirements. And then they have no capability to move those efficiently and quickly to different platforms as their requirements change. Maybe they become more of a static workload, and therefore it's not as suited into an Azure or AWS environment, and moving it into one of our CSP environments might be more beneficial. Having that capability is key to getting the most out of those strategies. And that's what Zerto can provide you, whilst simultaneously providing you the protection capabilities on top of that. And that's what we're deeming that true IT resilience capability, where it's planned and unplanned scenarios. So just a quick look, where's Zerto today? So 7,000 customers, 70 countries, 350 clouds. I think it's actually a few more than that. So cloud providers and over 1,100 partners globally. So it's a big thank you to our customers who are here today. Hopefully the prospects are here. You're going to be joining the family too soon. But at that point, I just want to hand over to Scott and let him tell you his story.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.
All right. All right, so last year I was here as a prospect. We saw how good Zerto was, and we implemented it first this year. Mizuma is a, come on, oh. There we go, sorry. Mizuma is a credit union in Kansas City. We've got 11 branches across the KC metro area. $700 million in deposits. We're like the third largest in our region. We have 225 employees. We've grown about 25% in the last 2 years, and in branch-wise, but employee-wise, it's only been about 10%. So doing more with less resources that we have. That's our headquarters there. Right now it's pouring rain up there in Kansas City, so we're flooding, I guess. We had a very legacy environment when we started a couple years ago. We had old systems that could do what we wanted to do for DR and business continuity, but they had very limited resources in what they could spin up in our DR environment. So we started looking around at what we could do to make this environment a lot more stable and resilient. We've used in the past SRM, we used SAN replication and whatnot. But as we started moving forward on transformation of our environment, we didn't really have the opportunity to use some of those tools because they didn't have some of the resources in place. Coming in, we looked at our backup and archive environment, and we replaced it with a newer tool with Rubric. Provide us great backups and archive to the cloud. We archive off to Azure right now, and we archive secondarily off to NAS across to our DR site. It was a great tool for us, but there are some limitations. Our hardware we had in place was not able to do, basically not able to do more than 24 hours without filling the device up, without archiving stuff off. So we started looking around, it's like, let's find a better way to have more recovery points for what we have in our environment. Why we chose Zerto, in the past I've dealt with VMware, SRM, you get VMware update, and our environment was relatively small, but we still had the problems. We had to, sometimes upgrade or rebuild the SRM environment if things went bad with the update. So Zerto was just way, way easier for us to implement. On the hardware side, we had inconsistent SANs. We had old legacy SANs at our DR and our production facilities. When we put in new environments, we put in Pure on our production side, but we didn't want to spend the money to put Pure out in the DR facility. So it was like trying to find a tool that would work with what we had in our environment. And the biggest thing is being the flexibility of the target choices. Since we already had a little footprint in Azure, we had a little footprint in AWS as well. It was, we started talking through, and it's like, we have in Kansas, Oklahoma, whatnot, you have tornadoes left and right, and we had everything above ground in our primary production facility. We had a little bit of room over in DR, and it was like, we can move some of these things to the cloud environment and still have it protected up there. It would be a better solution for us with the resources we had available for the costs and whatnot. Our first phase was this first quarter. We implemented Zerto to protect our Azure environment. We have a small footprint up in Azure, a dozen or so VMs that we protected back in VMware, and then same way we also protected some of the machines up from VMware up into Azure as well. We already had a VPN connected up there for our transformation we already done. We already had migrated and moved all of our environment to Office 365, started utilizing Dynamics and CRM as well in the cloud. So our CIO and I, we're talking through things. We've been moving a lot of things to the cloud, working with our network security team and our CISO, getting things secure up there for that. And basically, we've been doing our Windows VMs currently, working with those. We'll start doing a little bit of our Linux machines later on, probably next year. But we plan on trying to utilize Zerto as well to migrate some of the on-premise resources up into the cloud as well too. So things that aren't really heavy workloads or whatnot, taking them off the on-premise resources to save those for anything we need to expand that needs to stay on site. And utilize that versus doing any more hardware acquisitions for the on-premise environments. Our second phase we started in Q2 of this year was utilizing AWS. We already have a small footprint of, we're using Alexa services for phone services, and we went ahead and started deploying that this second quarter. Very small, we only have a few machines in each environment we're replicating, but it is working very well. We had to set up a VPN and work with some third parties to get that secured and set up. And then one of the big things I saw that actually in March, I think of this year, someone had done a white paper on using VPC endpoints to reduce the costs for your traffic over to S3. So that was one thing that was a nice thing to add when we did that. And our plan in the big picture is that we would like to be able to replicate stuff back and forth from AWS and Azure both, not coming back to on-premise, just keep it up in the cloud totally if we can. Long term, we are looking at Zerto 7 for its backup capabilities because we have Rubric. It's a great tool, but if we can eliminate one solution and save some costs, we're still looking at the Zerto backup. But I think once we, after this couple days, maybe that'll give me a little more insight if we can use it, and it'd be at least as good, if not better, than what we already have in place. The big things that we noticed during our deployment was getting with all of our application owners and we're a relatively small environment with IT, but we had a lot of turnover. So not everybody knew what was going on, what machines were communicating with what, and how they were talking, if they were using DNS or they were hard-coded IPs. So just trying to figure out what were the machines that you had to go in and understand these could or couldn't go up. If you had to work with third parties to, maybe there's a lot of third-party software we use in the banking side that maybe more trouble to try to get them up there than you really wanted to deal with. We had good candidates for moving to the cloud that weren't real high-use machines. They were more IT-busy machines, a print server or something, or a file share. So we were moving some of those up that were really heavy load machines. Bandwidth has been a big thing. We started our transformation to the cloud environments, and we have a very relatively small pipe to the cloud. And we had planned to upgrade that 5-fold and haven't gotten there yet, so now we're upgrading it 20-fold, so we have plenty of bandwidth once we utilize try to get all these things up to the cloud and do the whole environment. Working with our local SC, there's a tool, actually sorry, that's right. This one, takeaways on this VMware Tools. If you have the VMware Tools preloaded on all your Azure workloads, and when you bring it back down to vCenter, they just spin up seamlessly for you. And kind of the same thing if you want to move some things up from VMware to AWS, load the tools on there as well too. And in our case, everything's worked very seamlessly there. And beyond that, that's where we are.
Thank you very much. So obviously, historically, we had an Excel spreadsheet to help work on bandwidths and ultimately give you insights around what that's likely to be. That's really what the planner stuff that's coming into Zerto Analytics is going to replace. It's going to provide a lot more automation, be ultimately a lot bigger than just bandwidth and journal sizing. It's looking at the environment as well. So there's a lot of exciting things coming there. As I said, Lee's got a session on that later. But if there's any questions now to myself or to Scott, more than happy to take them. So, there's a couple over here.
You talked about reducing the number of ZCAs. We have 3 in Azure right now, and we're still at 6.5. So just wondering, what we can look at, or like, what's the estimate for VMs?
So the change we've made in 7.0 is to promotion. So when you perform a recovery, that's going to be a lot quicker, and the load is going to be taken off the ZCA for that. What we're doing is a next step, which hopefully is coming in the next release, and Rob will probably mention this in his session as well, is actually moving that out to the ongoing protection. So when we're protecting your workloads, we're continually moving data to the journal, and then from the journal to the replica disk, essentially out there, the mirror disk. Now that process right now is still managed by a ZCA. So when we move that out into the scale set capability as well, that's instantly going to take a lot of the overhead off. So it would be specific to your environment. We'd have to look at it. If the continuous piece isn't the piece that's requiring the multiple ZCAs, then, and it's the recovery piece, then right now you might be able to reduce them. But otherwise, 7.5 is in September is probably going to be more likely to get those back down. So yeah, essentially what this allows us to do is hit Azure limits. So right now, where you're contended on a ZCA, there's obviously contention around that, and the only way to scale is to scale up, and you get bigger and bigger instances and things like that, or you deploy multiple ZCAs. What this allows us to do is make sure that we're hitting the maximum. So there's storage, on storage accounts, there's IOPS limits. So it's 20,000 per storage account in Azure, and each ZCA has its own storage account. So if you're hitting over 20,000 IOPS, there could be a necessity to have a ZCA because of that, because it's an Azure limitation. Or Azure maximum. What these the scale sets allow us to do is essentially hit that maximum. So from a disk, I think per disk it's like 500 IOPS per disk. So when we're then looking at doing up to 40 in a scale set, that allows us to hit up to the 20,000 IOPS. So essentially we're maximizing the capabilities of Azure. That's really what we're trying to deliver with this capability.
Thank you.
I didn't hear something that I thought I might, so I just wonder if you could comment on it. Artificial intelligence, where does that fit in your analytics and your plans for the future?
So that's a great question that my colleague Lee could be answer, but I don't know whether you probably want to talk about that maybe in your session tomorrow.
That always comes up, sure. The short answer is, I'll try to keep this to 20 seconds. AI started back in the 80s, right? It means a lot of different things. The state of the world right now for AI, excuse me, predominantly business analytics, and it's also machine learning. Those are the two big buckets. Frankly, we're not doing any of that. What we're doing in Zero Analytics is we're collecting your data and we're embedding the algorithms we need. So, we could spin it as analytics, as AI, but really what we're doing is just embedding the solutions in our product so you just get the answers. That's a short answer. We can talk more about it tomorrow. Last session of the day.
So from my perspective, there's some pretty cool things that, looking at what we're delivering in the future, we'll be able to enable you to do. Possibly, it might have to be implemented via the API today. But for example, with ransomware, encrypts all your files, what you're going to see there is a big spike in I/O. So you could be monitoring that big spike in I/O. What long-term we're going to be delivering for you is actually the ability to take any point in time within the journal and store it for long-term retention. So what potentially in the future you'll be able to do is essentially see that big spike in I/O, and now that's going to be one of two things probably. Either it's going to be a genuine big change, at which point you probably want to ensure that you've got a protection point in time after that, because it's a large amount of change, you're not going to want to do it again. Or alternatively, it's ransomware. So what you could potentially do here is actually take a point in time from before the spike occurred in the journal, store it for long-term retention, so you're protected from that perspective, and then also take one after the spike in case it's a big change. Essentially what that's going to allow you to do is take a backup of the past, which is pretty powerful, I think. So there's some...
The point being that ransomware can't get around the idea that it's got to use a lot of analytic, a lot of compute in order to do...
Correct, yeah. You're going to see it has to change every file, so you're going to see that as it appears in analytics. So there's a lot you can do off the back of that data.
You mentioned about the scale promotion and user. What about AWS?
So yeah, AWS is absolutely on the roadmap. I guess we've seen the most growth and partnership with Microsoft and Azure recently, which is why we started there. But yes, definitely AWS. There's a lot coming in on our future roadmap with that. Probably next year now. But there's definitely plans to do exactly the same through there. Obviously, we'll have to use the services and integration available. Yes, exactly. So how we deliver that is probably a bit early to talk about. One thing I will say, if you want to hear a bit more about AWS and Azure on a deep dive, we've got a separate session for each of those, so recommend going to those. They're being run by our cloud SMEs, so there'll be a lot of information on those as well. Any other questions? Awesome. Has this been useful? Cool. So I guess the only thing is on the app you can provide review, put info in here. Appreciate if you could do this 5 stars. But yeah, share your thoughts. This really is going to impact what our agenda looks like next year. So thanks for your time, guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.